The floor gleamed like still water beneath the glass tower's lights when the insult landed. A casual cruelty tossed across a lobby of marble and mirrors. The man with the name on the top floor didn't expect the night shift to hear more than orders. He didn't expect the cameras to catch angles his ego missed. He didn't expect the quiet man with the cart and the broom to carry anything heavier than a mop. He misjudged all of it. By dawn, the emails would be drafted, the emergency meeting scheduled, and the legal team awake with adrenaline and dread. By lunch, the story would have a spine, a pattern, a record, an outcome. And by dusk, shareholders would applaud a decision the board swore was about values, even though everyone understood it was also about risk. It began with humiliation. It pivoted on a single phone call. It ended with a door closing on the very person who thought he owned every hallway in the building. Langston Reed knew buildings the way gardeners know soil. He could sense when a chiller was 2 weeks from failure by the way the fourth-floor vents breathed. He could spot scuffed corners that would become trip hazards and replace entrance mats before the rain came. For 28 years, he had worked nights inside downtown monuments to ambition, towers where glass replaced sky and timelines replaced sleep. He preferred the hours when offices were hushed and screens turned into constellations in empty rooms. At Helios Dynamics, the lobby felt like a museum of power. Stone so pale it drank up the lights, a staircase that announced whoever descended it, a logo polished until reflections looked like badges. Langston arrived each evening with a thermos of chicory coffee and a folded page from a second-hand paperback marking his place. He worked with the calm tempo of a person who trusted his own hands. He had learned to become smaller than the work. The mop, the cart, the buckets, the silent elevator rides. These were rituals he'd shaped into a kind of armor. People were kind often enough. People were careless often enough. He had been called by the wrong name and handed tip money like it wiped away the sting. He had watched interns glance at their reflections and treat him like a moving smudge. He had also collected thank you notes, homemade cookies, and warm nods from the security staff who knew how much invisible labor kept grandeur upright. What almost no one knew was that Langston's world extended past the building's edges. On weekends, he volunteered at a community center, taught teenagers the basics of facilities work that could lead to stable wage careers, and served on a small advisory board for a city workforce program. Years earlier, he had helped a single mother study for her certification exam in the quiet of that community center, showing her how to read electrical diagrams and calculate load. She passed, rose, and kept rising. She now chaired the state teachers' pension fund, one of the largest shareholders in Helios Dynamics. They spoke infrequently. When they did, the conversation never lingered on status. It returned to purpose like a compass needle. Langston never went looking for confrontation. He went looking for dust, spills, and things others missed. He thought that was enough. The night Helios held its quarterly showcase for analysts and high-value clients, the lobby transformed. A temporary stage rose in front of the grand staircase. An LED wall cycled through sleek product teasers. The catering team moved like a well-choreographed hush. A string quartet tuned under the mezzanine, while a bar staff polished stemware that caught the light like crystal snow. The CEO, Victor Halden, liked to start these evenings with a walk from the top of the stairs to the stage, a kind of theatrical descent that cast him as both host and conqueror. Langston had been through 6 of these. He understood the map of preparation. Lift the rugs earlier, run the scrubber on low to avoid streaks, tape down the cords that always threatened to coil like snakes near the left service door. He rotated through his stations methodically, mindful of the camera blind spots and the places where high heels would cross at perilous angles. By 9:30, he had done the last discreet sweep and parked his cart beside a column out of sight. The first incident was small. A tech investor bumped into the cart while hunting for a signal on his phone, sloshing a line of red across the marble like a cut. Langston was there before the drop widened, blotting and steadying, letting the microfiber cloth lift the stain before it could settle into pores. The investor grunted and moved on. Langston felt the familiar mix of relief and invisibility. He preferred that to the wrong kind of attention. The wrong kind arrived on schedule. Victor Halden stepped onto the staircase with a cluster of board members and a spine that seemed to repel humility. Tall, tanned, hair immovable even against the air conditioning's whisper, he looked like an advertisement for the inevitability of success. He was known for candor that read as charisma to admirers and as arrogance to everyone else. He scanned the lobby with proprietary satisfaction until his eyes landed on Langston's small station tucked by the column. Langston sensed the turn before it happened. He had an ear for heat in human voices, even when words stayed polite. Nearby, a photographer aimed for the decisive shot of the CEO descending. The first violin settled into an elegant melody, and two young analysts adjusted their badge lanyards while planning their notes. Langston slid the cart back another half-foot, the universal gesture of making room. The humiliation unfolded in increments, each one a deliberate brushstroke in a painting meant to hang in the minds of onlookers. A gesture implying the cart polluted the sightline. A command delivered with a smile that expected immediate compliance without acknowledgement. A performance of small authority turned into major theater. An insinuation, dressed as concern for presentation, that the man with the mop did not belong in the frame. A joke floated for the benefit of donors who followed the CEO's gaze and found, at the end of it, the only black man in a room designed to gleam with sameness. Langston felt heat climb his neck. He kept his face still. He moved the cart, as requested, to a spot that forced him into an awkward dance with the catering team. And then he noticed something else. A woman near the mezzanine stiffening, a security guard's jaw tightening, a junior employee's hands clenching a tablet a little too hard. He recognized witnesses who understood the choreography, people who had seen the same dance in different rooms. In the cavernous lobby, beneath music that smoothed every edge, the air carried a different note, one that did not fade.
The second cut came sharper. A glass shattered near the bar, a fragile sound that iced the room. Langston reached the spill with a towel, bent to gather slivers, and felt a shadow tower above him. He heard a laugh coated in benevolence that wasn't benevolent at all. He absorbed words that weren't spoken to him but were staged around him, words that said mess belonged to him, that order belonged to others, that his presence was a flaw to be corrected. He heard the room's stillness tighten. The string quartet paused. He understood that this would be remembered not as a minor awkwardness but as a map of where lines were drawn and who was expected to step back. He did what he always did first, he worked. He collected the glass methodically, checked for stray shards, buffed the surface, and cleared the hazard. He steadied his breath. He stood, careful to center gravity in his hips because knees sometimes trembled when the world narrowed into a spotlight he hadn't invited. He turned and faced no one in particular, which meant he faced everyone. He held the silence for a heartbeat longer than the script allowed. Then he stepped away from the stage and into a service corridor where the building's bones were visible, pipes, timers, racks of supplies, the to-do lists taped beside breaker panels. His hands found his phone not as a weapon, not even as a shield, but as a key that opened a line of respect he trusted. He did not scroll through contacts. He knew exactly which number to press. On another floor, near the green-gold glow of an antique banker's lamp, a woman who led people's retirement savings as if they were family heirlooms felt her phone vibrate. She remembered long evenings in a community center classroom, a man's steady patience over diagrams and decimals, the way he never once suggested that any of this was beyond her. He told her, without speeches, without spotlight, that skill belonged to anyone who practiced enough, that dignity was not earned by titles but by choices repeated until they built a life. He summarized what had happened in the precise way a maintenance log tells a truthful story: times, places, sequences, witnesses. He mentioned the cameras. He mentioned the pattern others had noticed in the CEO's previous gatherings, quietly known but rarely documented. He asked for nothing. He simply placed truth on the table. The woman, who chaired a fund that held 12% of Helios Dynamics, did not raise her voice. She did not need to. She made one phone call, then another, until the arc of the boardroom tilted. The night's elegance melted into a long dark corridor of consequence. Emails zipped across time zones, short and clinical and cold. The head of corporate affairs drafted a message to the board chair marked urgent. A compliance officer opened a folder whose existence had been tolerated but not read, notes of incidents that never quite rose to a formal complaint yet left bruises across morale. The general counsel, awakened in a half-lit bedroom, scanned footage pulled by security at the request of a person she'd never met but whose title she recognized instantly, the chair of a fund whose votes decided fortunes. The video offered angles live witnesses could not. It caught the glint of glass becoming shards. It caught the way a man's laughter swelled when he believed he was untouchable. It caught the stiffness in shoulders around the room, the practiced smiles of people who were trying very hard to pretend nothing had happened. It caught a janitor's hands, steady, precise, and unshakably dignified, doing the work that kept Helios from tripping over itself. By 3 a.m, 2 directors who had argued for reforms a year earlier had the wind at their backs. By 4, a third director who had remained neutral realized neutrality had expired. By 5, the board chair was on the phone with the founder emeritus, whose years could not blunt his clarity about reputational risk and human decency. The founder had watched an older era tolerate too much under the banner of excellence. He had no appetite for repeating that mistake in a market that punished arrogance faster than any regulator could. At 7:30, security deactivated a single badge on the top floor. The building's access logs, usually dull, recorded a change like a thunderclap. At 8, an executive assistant with careful hands and frightened eyes carried a sealed envelope down a narrow hallway to a door that had so rarely been knocked upon from the outside. Inside, a man in a tailored suit opened it and understood, in an instant, that the physics of power had inverted while he slept. The emergency meeting lasted 41 minutes. No one shouted. No one needed to. A motion was made, seconded, voted. A scripted statement was prepared for the press and for employees. Severance terms were reviewed with a new ruthlessness, a morals clause, negotiated with yawns years ago, suddenly sharpened. The message, when released, trimmed the story to its PR-approved bones, values, accountability, leadership transitions. But inside the building, word traveled faster than any press release. People who had watched jokes curdle into something ugly shared glances of disbelief turned relief. The security guard whose jaw had tightened let his shoulders settle. The violinist packed her instrument and told herself she would remember the night that power bowed to evidence. The 2 analysts with the too tight lanyards learned more about governance in a morning than any MBA had taught them. On the mezzanine, a man with a cart and a thermos finished his checklist. He had slept, lightly, between calls and confirmations. He did not gloat, he did not plan to. He signed his shift sheet, replaced a frayed mop head, and logged a maintenance request for a loose stair tread that he had flagged twice before. He wrote it exactly the same way he always did, clearly, completely, without flourish, because the building still needed tending, and dignity still demanded craft. The story people told later made the phone call sound like thunder. The truth felt quieter and more precise. It felt like a ledger finally balanced, like a level finding true. It was not a triumph that erased what had happened, it was a correction that acknowledged it mattered. Helios Dynamics did the things companies do when they are startled into conscience. They hired an outside firm to conduct a culture audit. They scheduled unconscious bias workshops that were better than average and not nearly enough. They changed the seating chart on the executive floor and expanded the remit of compliance to include respect as more than a word in a policy. They began opening quarterly showcases with a statement about safety and inclusion that would eventually seem less performative and more practiced, because repetition can teach even stiff muscles to move differently. But the real impact lived in smaller rooms and longer arcs. An intern who had watched the incident from a corner decided that his silence would not be his inheritance. He organized a peer group that met over coffee to share stories and strategies for speaking up. A mid-level manager who once excused microaggressions as bad jokes told his team, without drama, that he had been wrong to let them pass, and asked to be held to a higher bar. A director who had feared being labeled difficult began documenting patterns with dates and details, understanding that rigor is a form of protection. At the community center, teenagers learned the story a different way. They saw a man who knew his worth whether or not a room recognized it. They watched him arrive on a Saturday with the same calm he brought to the building at night. He taught them how to maintain a floor so it shone without becoming slick, how to spot a leak before it grew teeth, how to read an equipment manual as if it were a map. He taught them something else too, that respect is not a favor granted by rank, and that courage sometimes looks like telling the right person the truth at the right time. Langston did not become a public figure. He did not want to be a symbol. He wanted his knees to hold up for another decade of honest work and his thermos to stay warm through the small hours. He wanted the people who shared the night shift to feel safer when they rolled their carts past bright rooms. He wanted fewer apologies that arrived only after exposure, and more choices made because it was the right thing to do when no one was watching. He was asked, once, by the workforce programs coordinator, whether he felt the CEO's firing meant justice. He thought about the building's bones, the beams and risers hidden behind the sheen. Justice, he understood, is maintenance more than spectacle. It is the daily tightening of bolts, the routine checks for stress, the habit of cleaning not just what shines but what collects grime because no one looks there. It is a standard held and held again, even when expedience tempts shortcuts. The board moved on. The company's stock wobbled and then stabilized. The press cycle spun and faded. In the Helios lobby, the pale stone still drank light, the staircase still announced arrivals. Yet the space remembered. People who walked through it carried a new memory, an internal sign warning them where pride becomes hazard. And somewhere in the cadence of the night shift, in the squeak of a cartwheel that needed a drop of oil, in the marker stroke across a checklist box, a steady truth held: the work of dignity is continuous. The last word did not belong to the board, or the press, or the founder emeritus reaching for legacy. It belonged to a question that hung in the quiet after the crowds left and the music's echo dissolved against glass, when the next small cruelty flickers at the edge of a room, when a laugh leans on someone's back because it thinks no one will mind, who will choose to notice, and what will they do with what they see? Because a single phone call can change a company. But 1,000 small choices can change its soul.